I'm Katie Hacker, your host. Brick stitch is one of the most popular stitches and it's been around forever, but it can be a little bit intimidating. Today, Francie Brodie is here to take the worry out of brick stitch with a simple, lightweight, large O-ring earring, which is perfect for summer fun or holiday festivities. Welcome, Francie. I'm so happy you're here.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. And I know you teach classes on jewelry making, and this must be a really popular one.
It is. It's fun. It's a good beginner kind of project, a little step up from basic stringing.
Yeah, let's take a look at the earrings. These are gorgeous. I love your color choices, and these are what really drew my eye.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I like bright colors.
Definitely. So fun, and lots of different ways you can go,
yep.
Versatility-wise.
Yes, definitely.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about our supplies.
Yes, so for this project, you need 2 different colors of size 11 seed beads, size 8 seed beads, size 6 seed beads, and then 2 sizes of O-rings. So these are rubber O-rings and some basic sterling silver ear wires. And I like to use nylon thread for this project because the thread actually does play a part in the design, so it's fun to play with different colored threads. Okay. So I guess we get started.
Sure, let's learn how to do our thread prep.
So you're gonna start with 2 yards of thread and we're gonna double it, which is a little unusual for beading. And I have a piece here that's all good to go, and I always wax thread because it helps with the detangling and holding your 2 plies together so that you're not, fighting it.
Right. We've also been talking this season about creating jewelry that's going to last for a long time. So anytime you're waxing the thread, it's going to increase that durability too.
That does help. So we're going to make a knot at the end of the beadwork, which is unusual also for beadwork. You don't usually start with a knot, but I just tie a basic overhand knot, and then we trim the tail close to the knot. And then we're going to melt this knot, and to do that, you just get the lighter and bring the knot close to the lighter, but not actually in the fire, because if you put it in the fire, it just frizzles up and falls off. And just give it a little tug with your thumb to make sure it's still attached. If it isn't, you do that again.
Okay.
So to begin with, we're going to take the ring, and I'm demonstrating on slightly larger beads so it's easier to see. And we're going to take the knot end and we're going to stick it through the ring, and then we're going to separate the 2 plies of thread, which is a little trickier than it looks, but not too hard. So you just bring the needle in between the 2 plies and then pull it tight, and that secures your thread so you don't have to worry about tying off those pesky tail threads later.
Great.
And now we're ready to get started. So whenever you begin brick stitch, you start with 2 beads. After that, you only ever add 1 bead, but at the beginning, you always begin the row with 2 beads. So I'm gonna pick up 2 what would be size 11 beads, and we're gonna bring them down close up against the ring. And then I'm gonna pass underneath the ring and then back up through the second bead I strung, but from the direction that the string is coming out of. So when you've completed it, you'll have your 2 beads lined up with the holes vertical,
side.
and they'll be side by side. So now you just continue on adding 1 bead at a time. So we'll pick up 1 bead and then slide it down. And this is an important stitch to actually slide your beads into place before you start. I don't normally do that when I bead, but with brick stitch, it's very helpful because when you pull, it puts your bead into place, and then you can it puts it where you need to be, so you know you just need to bring your needle out
so
that it's on the outside
right there
edge.
For you.
And then you just continue around until your 2 ends meet up. And then you're gonna have to just kind of eyeball it to see whether you can fit something in there. It looks like you could, but there's really not enough room between those 2 beads. So don't worry about it. All you're gonna do is you're gonna join these 2 ends together. So to do this, I'm gonna pass down through the bead that we started from. Actually, if we are looking at it correctly, this is where you started and this is where you ended. So I pass down through the bead I started from and underneath the ring, and then back up the bead I started. And that will just join those in place. And then it just nudges them to close together.
Right.
And if there's a little gap, it doesn't really matter.
So if you get confused, you always just want to make sure that your thread is extending outward.
Yes,
from
you
the
always,
ring.
whenever you add a bead, you always want to be on the outside edge of your
Okay.
beadwork. So now we're going to start the second row. And again, we always begin with 2 beads. So we'll pick up 2 beads. Now these beads are bigger than the beads we started with. So on this row, we're going to actually have to decrease. And we'll get to that in a second. But this time around, we're going to use the thread bridge that runs between the 2 beads as our anchor for our thread. So you're going to pass your needle underneath the thread bridge and then back up through the bead, the second bead we added. And this will just hold these in place. And now we're going to continue around, and to decrease, what you do is you skip a thread bridge. So here, if I put a bead right here, it's going to kind of bulge over into the next one. So I'm actually going to skip this thread bridge and pass underneath the next thread bridge, and then back up through the bead.
So it gives it a little more space.
It gives it a little more space. And what happens if you don't do that, it starts to ruffle, which is an interesting effect, but it's not what we're going for here. So I'll continue around. Now, if this one is pressed down, now I'm lined up to do the next one. And you'll just keep going around until the ends meet again. Okay. And you'll do the same step you did on this previous row. And then we'll switch back to the size 11 beads, which are being stand-ins for these big beads here. So we'll start with 2 again and pass under the thread bridge and back up. And now, since we've switched to smaller beads, we're going to need to increase. So what happens is if I used the next thread bridge, which is way over here, that would leave us a big, huge gap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that same thread bridge again. And increasing is as simple as that. We just pass under that same thread bridge we started with and back out through the bead. And now you have your 3 lined up neatly. So now when I get to this one, I'll probably end up having to put 2 beads in that thread bridge too.
Okay.
So you continue around until the ends meet up and you join the ends again.
Okay, so this is an example of how this looks when you're using the tiny beads, right?
Yes.
Same techniques here, though.
Exact same techniques, just smaller beads, a little harder to see. But now we're ready to add the top part, which is where we're going to end up hanging the earring from. So we're going to switch to size 6 seed beads. And generally, when I've finished this outside edge, I weave through a couple more beads so that all my thread isn't in the same spot.
Right, so
and you want to come with your thread exiting one of the outside beads. And then we'll just pick up a size 6 bead and one of your rubber rings, the smaller rubber ring. And then we just skip that rubber ring and pass back through the other rubber ring and down into the seed bead that's right next to the one you came out of. So, and when you do that, it anchors it flat, and then what you do is you just reinforce that thread path a few times because this is what's going to take the stress on your earring. So I weave through that same path a few times, and then I weave my thread in and out through the beads until I come about a quarter of the way around the circle.
And that's where you're going to start adding your fan?
Yes. Yes, and that's another part you have to kind of eyeball. I have some samples that have 8 beads and some that have 9 beads as the fan, and the way you determine that is just how your center bead lines up with the top bead you have there. So if it lines up so that your bead is in the center with the bottom bead in the center, then you'll have an odd number. If it comes out between 2 beads, then you'll have an even number.
And to finish it, do you weave the tails in or do you actually tie a knot?
Lots of people who do brick stitch just weave things in and out. And I personally like knots and feel like it's a little more secure. So I tend to tie just a few half hitches. I don't go overboard, but just a few here and there.
Okay. Let's take a look at the finished earrings because these are just gorgeous, and I want to make sure that we can see some of the examples of how you add this fan along the bottom.
Yes, and you can change that fan bead. On some of those I've used a 4mm fire polish, and on some of them I've used a 4mm pearl or gemstone.
Yeah, good idea.